the fundamental turning point further. Muslim nation is here. The balance between the scholars and the political authority collapsed. We haven't reached rock bottom yet. We, as a nation, are on the path to resurgence. The end of this decline was the fall of the caliphate. Of course, what does this have to do with the idea of decline itself? The best days of the Ottoman state were better than what came after. They progressed, you regressed. Don't be upset. That's life. When someone sees something impressive among Muslims, they wish they could discuss the superiority of Islamic civilization over Western civilization. The idea of discussing this is outdated. Only those ignorant of the subject would discuss this. Was this transition forced? All of Western and European civilization arose because of it. How many books do you claim we took from you? The discoveries made by Muslims were pivotal in modern human progress. When a person sees their relationship with a state from a religious perspective, they are shocked. No, there's no such thing as state money. There's no such thing. The prestige of the state. There's no such thing as sacrificing yourself for the state, and talking about it, by the way, is annoying to the ruling regimes. Arab rulers are nationalists as long as they're not in power. As soon as they come to power, they become music patriots. Peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. This is the 8th episode of the 100 Questions in History series. Where have we reached? We've reached question 19. Question 19. This series, as is well known, has a regular guest, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Abu Al-Harith. May God reward you. I mean, God willing, God willing. The reactions to the series are truly heartwarming and truly encourage us to continue giving and contributing. This is from the grace of God. May God reward you. Question 19. Professor Muhammad is about the main, fundamental point of breaking for the Islamic nation. We, all nations, rise and fall, but from the time of the Prophet's mission, peace and blessings be upon him, until this moment, the major, fundamental point of breaking for the nation, the one that broke the camel's back, the one that made us. When did this transformation begin? When did this decline in Islamic civilization start? I mean, when did we move from a period of civilization and prosperity to a period of weakness and decline? When did it begin? Beautiful. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Praise be to God, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. Of course, your question was about the fundamental moment of decline. Yes, you know, this is one of the things people disagree on. Historians and thinkers differ on when the fundamental moment of decline occurred. For example, I imagine, if you posed this question to a number of people, you would get as many different answers as there were. Many people, for example, would like to focus on the moment that marked the beginning of the Umayyad state, which is the beginning of oppressive rule, when the caliphate transformed into a monarchy after having been a consultative system. Undoubtedly, this answer contains some truth because the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, mentioned a caliphate that would then become an oppressive monarchy, and he said, the bonds of Islam will be broken one by one. The first to be broken will be the system of governance. That is, the first thing that will be weakened and dissolved in Islam is the system of governance, and this actually happened. It's considered the first sign of weakness in Islamic civilization. Some people might say that the beginning of this decline was with the end of the Umayyad Caliphate. As we said, the Umayyad Caliphate was an Arab state and its rulers were Arabs. However, when the Abbasid Caliphate came to power and while its caliphs were indeed Arab Abbasids and Hashemites, many of its officials were non-Arabs. Some argue that the influx of non-Arab elements marked the beginning of a non-Arab culture and the introduction of impurities into the body of Islamic civilization. This is where the problem began. Some people will say that the problem began when the Turkish military seized the Abbasid Caliphate and facto rulers, weakening the caliphs. This is because you are now faced with military rule and also with non-Arab rule. The powerful figure who came to control the Islamic world was the Turkish military, who was certainly far removed from understanding Islam as understood by an Arab who grew up with the language, Arabic and Arab culture, and even beyond understanding the civil personality, even the Persian, non-Arab, meaning that which originated in learning, is a Turkish military personality. Some people see this as the beginning of a moment. Some people might talk about the moment when the Abbasid Caliphate ruled the Shiite tendencies at the moment of Buyid control. These were military men, non-Arabs and Shiites, so they tell you that this moment was when the heart of the Islamic world and the power of the Islamic world, especially in this 4th century AH, was divided because it was a century of decline, and some historians call it the century of Shiite dominance, Shiite rule, because specifically the Fatimid Caliphate was established. So the Islamic world became divided between two caliphates, a Sunni Caliphate and a Shiite Ismaili Fatimid Caliphate. All of this, and of course, there are other matters. Some people talk about the Crusades as the first invasion of the heart of the Islamic world. Where did this happen in the Islamic world? One of its most important results was a rise of the military classes, because after that, when the Crusades came, the nation produced those who would fight and resist them. Consequently, military states, not civil states, emerged, such as the Zengid and Ayyubid states, and later the Mamluk state. A military state, by its nature, fulfills the duty of jihad to the best of its ability. However, when civilization arrives and benefits from civilization are utilized, the problems of the military state and the problems of the military nature begin to appear. This is also the analysis of some people. In any case, all of this has a point of view. I am not going to delve into all of this. I am just giving you some ideas. But what I am inclined to believe is that all of these were moments of decline, but they were followed by periods of hardship, then by periods of superiority. So I cannot call it the fundamental movement or the main turning point. In my estimation, the main turning point is what occurred during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. How so? This has a story that we need to tell, and I will be brief since time allows. One of the most important advantages that Islam brought, and upon which Islamic civilization was built, is that Islamic civilization is a divine civilization. Its origin is divine. In civilizations, religion was dominant in every aspect of the state. For example, in the Islamic mind, there is no such thing as state money. Money is called Muslim money. Therefore, when a disagreement arose between Abu Dihar and Muawiyah, the question was whether this money, what we call it, which is public money, since we now call it public money or state money. Muawiyah said, this money belongs to God. Abu Dihar was keen to call it Muslim money. What's the difference? The difference is that the phrase God's money, of course, all money belongs to God, and all of creation belongs to God, but the phrase God's money here gives the caliph broader authority to dispose of it than the phrase Muslim money. Neither of them said, this is state money. No, there is no such thing as state money. There is no such thing as state prestige. There is no such thing as sacrificing yourself for the state. No, every movement jihad, every movement of knowledge, every movement of politics was for the exaltation of religion, the exaltation of the word of God. The state itself is part of the tools of religion. It exists to establish the religion. Yes, or the scholars of Islamic political jurisprudence. That's how you read al-Mawardi's view. The imamate is established to succeed the Prophet in safeguarding the religion and governing the world according to it. This is Ghazali says that religion is the foundation and the king is the guardian of religion. Religion is the foundation and the king is the guardian. So, what has no foundation is permanent, and what has no guardian is lost. Okay, and therefore, when the state arose, it arose from the trees of religion, from under the shade of religion. Okay, so when I say that, the ruler and the ruled, meaning all the people living in the Islamic state in Islamic civilization, see themselves as serving the religion, and that the supreme authority is the authority of Sharia, and that they obey this ruler as long as he obeys God in them. If he disobeys him, then they owe him no obedience. Okay, and they rebel against him because he did not implement the religion. What did this system do? One of its most important advantages is that it reduced the powers of the state and reduced the powers of the ruler. So it made the ruler and the state. Their powers are limited. They perform the duties of security and defense and related matters. The state's role in Islam is to organize the internal situation, maintain security, protect the borders, and strive in the path of God. Related tasks include collecting taxes, jizya or poll tax, usher tithe, carriage land tax, establishing the police force, and setting up the judiciary. These are the major tasks. Meanwhile, the rest of the Islamic social movement is not dominated by the state. What has this done for us? It has given us a strong authority and a strong society, an authority with limited powers and an active society. You can live your life in the Islamic world without looking to authority or rulers and without needing them at all. You live your life from birth to death. When a scholar is formed, he studies in the Quran with his sheikhs, excels, teaches, and becomes a scholar. Then the state needs to tell him, we need a judge or we need a mufti. He comes and sits in the ruler's cot to consult him, and he accepts or refuses. If he refuses, it's none of his business. So the state had limited powers handling the major issues, while society moved independently, not relying on the state. Thus, we have a strong, vibrant, active, and cohesive society is one where daily rituals and values such as maintaining kinship ties, enjoining good and forbidding evil, and the best form of jihad is speaking truth to a tyrannical ruler. Whoever helps their brother in need, God will help them in their need. God helps the servant as long as the servant helps their brother. Maintaining kinship ties and feeding the hungry, Islam, by its very nature, creates a cohesive, mutually supportive, and supportive society. Therefore, we can be defeated militarily and the ruling power can be defeated militarily, yet the civilization can still endure because the civilization wasn't tied to the ruling power. When the political authority collapses, a popular resistance movement begins because power isn't concentrated in the hands of the ruler, the government, or the ruling power. The government only possesses a portion of the power. In a strong society, we have endowments that fund scholars, orphans, widows, schools, even the translation of scientific works, the freeing of prisoners, and mujahideen. There are mujahideen who fight without the ruler's permission. Responsibility is distributed, not exactly. So, we have a strong society, we have scholars, and we have authority. Therefore, in a state of power balance, when did this balance of power begin to collapse? It began to collapse during the reign of Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent. There is an early example when Abu Ja'far al-Mansur came to Imam Malik and said, I want you to write a book to guide the people, a book that avoids the strict rulings of Ibn Umar, the leniency of Ibn Abbas, and the deviations of Ibn Masud. Abu Ja'far was speaking to Imam Malik, saying, I want to spread it and make it the standard by which people are guided. Imam Malik refused. This was the first refusal to codify Sharia. He refused to allow Sharia to become law, saying, "O Commander of the Faithful, this is a serious matter." He also said, "Every people has its own knowledge." Of course, Imam Malik refused to have his book become the state. This situation remained thus until Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent. Of course, I think well of him, I am certain. He did this for the greater good. And what did the Sheikh al-Islam of his time, Abu Sword Effendi, do? He found, for example, that a single case could be judged by two judges, with two different rulings. You might be a sultan now, and you find yourself in this situation. You might consider that one of the judges is less knowledgeable than the other, meaning he is not competent, or that one of them was biased or angry and therefore ruled with a harsher judgment than normal, or that one of them was corrupt and bribed with money and ruled with a less than normal judgment, or other reasons. You, as a sultan, are in a centralized state. One of the flaws of the Ottoman state was that it was a centralized state, meaning centralization increased due to many circumstances. In short, this is a Turkish custom, and they inherited a centralized Byzantine state, because the historical context of the Ottoman state magnified the figure of the Sultan. The Ottoman state was the state in which centralization developed the most. So, the centralized sultan who wants to rectify this situation wants to one of the possibilities that comes to your mind when you see this situation of the two judges is that there are subtle details that differed between the two rulings. It is very possible you are now a judge. The judge in Islam rules without evidence, and God knows best, but a judge judges based on what he learned from his teachers according to the school of thought he studied. It's quite possible that a case might be presented to me as a judge, and I would choose the most appropriate opinion from within that school. It's also quite possible that I wouldn't find an opinion within the school, so I would turn to the opinion of a jurist outside the school to rule on the case, because I see the best course of action in this particular instance. This is because a judge isn't just someone who possesses knowledge of Islamic law. He also has an understanding of the realities before him. So, how does he apply Islamic law to the specific situation? For example, the case of the judge, which was a complex one, required him to exert his best effort in examining and considering the issue. Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent wanted to avoid what he perceived as corruption and decay within the judiciary. He was the first to seek to codify Islamic law by bringing in Sheikh Abu Sword Effendi and other Islamic scholars to compile Hanafi jurisprudence into a legal text presented as articles and case studies. This text would be binding on judges to prevent inconsistencies in legal proceedings. His intention was good, but what happened when he implemented this? What actually happened was that, firstly, the judge's discretion was curtailed. Now the judge has a book that he is obligated to rule upon, a book that he must adhere to. He no longer has the broad scope for independent reasoning within the school of thought or even outside of it. More dangerous than this is that this book was issued by the ruling authority, whereas before, the judge had no intermediary between him and God. Now the judge has a book sent down to him from the authority between him and God. Here, the balance between the community of scholars and the political authority collapsed. Here, the political authority elevated itself above the community of scholars. As long as there is codification of Sharia, we will have schools to train judges and imams, supervised by the state. And as long as there is an administrative structure, then the religious community, the community of scholars, has become part of the political authority instead of being another group, another authority, a parallel institution to the ruling institution. Now, what did the authority do? It absorbed it, and the community of scholars became part of the authority. This, in my view, is the moment when the most significant rupture occurred. Islamic civilization reached its zenith during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. But what does this have to do with the concept of decline itself? Okay, so science was codified, the judiciary was curtailed, and so on. But what does this have to do with asking this question means that we are a defeated nation today, humiliated among nations. We have no value, no purpose, my friend. Everything comes to us from abroad, so we are a broken nation. That's what he means. And so, Professor Muhammad al-Harmi takes us back to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who was, of course, the greatest and the largest area ever ruled by Islam. Yes, Sultan Suleiman ruled 20 million square kilometers. This was the zenith, after which there was decline. Beautiful words. A perfectly valid question. What does this have to do with decline? The connection to decline is that this active, rising Islamic society, whose institutions gradually began to be dominated by the ruling authority, saw its powers expand, not just to manage security and defense and related matters, but also to manage security and defense, and what pertains to them, managing education, managing media, managing the economy, managing culture, and managing society. This centralization, when power is concentrated in the government, the moment that government is gone, society is left powerless against foreign invaders or the collapse of the government. For example, you are the manager of a large company. You have access to all the files managed by your employees. When a department manager experiences any unforeseen circumstances, illness, fatigue, travel, what kind of collapse will occur in the company, it will be limited to that specific department. But when this manager, initially limited in scope, develops and becomes the manager of all these matters, and then experiences such a situation, what will happen? The entire operation will collapse. So, when you see the Islamic world, when the Umayyads collapsed, we had the Abbasids. When the Abbasids collapsed, we had the Mamluks. When the Mamluks collapsed, we had the Ottomans. When the Ottomans collapsed, there was no one left, because the Ottoman state was centralized, its policies were centralized, all social activities were concentrated in an institution affiliated with the government. This is a practical example. In Egypt, for example, we've always had al-Azhar, and al-Azhar experienced its golden age during the Mamluk and Ottoman eras. However, the Ottoman state, by its very nature, found the situation of al-Azhar and its sheikhs uncomfortable. They created the position of sheikh of al-Azhar, thinking, if I want to talk to these Azharites, who do I talk to? So, as soon as they created the position of sheikh of al-Azhar, what happened within the community of scholars? Competition began among them for their position. Naturally, this competition resulted in scholars currying favor with the authorities, and in others, it was a cascade of scholars rushing to please the Sultan in order to become the next Sheikh of al-Azhar. It's true that the Ottoman state didn't initially appoint a Sheikh of al-Azhar, meaning perhaps they didn't intend for their situation to develop in this way. But what did the Sheikh of al-Azhar do? He didn't organize the scholarly affairs as much as he brought them under the political control. As things progressed, the authority gained more power. In the past, the Sheikh was al-Azhar is like Sheikh Shahab al-Din al-Sambarti. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent sent a governor to Egypt named Dawood Pasha, who was pious and loved knowledge and scholars, a good man, I don't know what else. Sheikh Shahab al-Din al-Sambarti told him, you are not allowed to rule because you are still under the yoke of the prince. You are a slave. You cannot rule free people. Of course, Dawood Pasha couldn't believe it and went to arrest him, but he found the Ottoman soldiers standing with the sheikh against him. They said, What are you doing? This is the Sheikh of Islam. He had no choice but to report what had happened to Sultan Suleiman. Sultan Suleiman sent Sheikh al-Sabarti a letter of thanks along with a document freeing him from slavery so he could. You see how things were when Al-Azhar had no sheikhs, no sheikh of Al-Azhar. Now, when Al-Azhar had a sheikh and time passed and the authority became corrupt, there was a sheikh of Al-Azhar appointed and dismissed by the ruler. So now, instead of the scholarly situation, instead of the scholars being the leaders of society and holding authority parallel to the ruling authority, they have now become employees of the ruling authority, and they have become less capable of leading society and expressing it in the face of the authority. For example, the Abbasids in the House of Wisdom did not appoint a head, but rather an administrative head for a group. However, the Abbasids did not send anyone to the scientific field, nor did they control it. So, in short, Sheikh Murad Abu al-Harith, the centralization that the Ottoman state adopted remained centralized in the judiciary, in the Sheikhim, and later in education, when the state contained within itself all the centers of power and authority and monopolized them. So, as soon as the Ottoman state disappeared, the Islamic world found itself exposed to foreign occupation. This is the fundamental moment of defeat, the main moment, as you put it, that broke the back. Of course, everything that the Ottoman state did in terms of centralization is nothing compared to what the modern state has done. The modern state controls people with enormous control. Every person has an identity card. Every person has a bank account. All your information is with the state. Your address, your phone number, even your bank card, what you bought today, where you were, there's immense control. I mean, this modern centralized state, which is a global complex that torments peoples across the world, east and west, is a huge problem. But I want to say that the Ottoman state, compared to the modern state, was a paradise, no doubt about it. However, compared to what came before it in the Islamic world, the Ottoman state was the beginning of the nation's integration into state rule. And here, when Ottoman authority became corrupt and began to weaken and be defeated by the West, and Westernization swept through it, and the Ottoman state was unable to repel this wave, there were no active forces or vital powers in the Islamic world that could represent an alternative to the Ottoman state. So, Professor Muhammad, the moment of defeat isn't, for example, the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or the end of the Umayyad or Abbasid dynasties, or the entry of Islam into power, or whatever it may be from your point of view. You see what Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent did on the great. His greatness means what he offered to Islam and Muslims. It was the beginning of this decline, and the end of this decline was the fall of the caliphate. Yes, the fall of the caliphate. This was the stage of announcing the fall of this Islamic nation and its fragmentation. Look, the last day of the Ottoman state was better than any day after it. Indeed, without a doubt, this is even witnessed by nationalists, meaning people of Arab nationalism who hated the Ottoman state and wanted liberation from it. I mention here, for example, one of the last people I read about this, Ahmed Shukeri, who was the first president of the Palestine Liberation Organization. He was an Arab nationalist. His father, Asad Shukeri, was the Mufti of the Fourth Army, and he was one of those who opposed the Ottomans and was among those who rejoiced in Sharif Hussein's revolt, which he considered the Great Arab Revolt. He writes in his memoirs 40 years in International Life, in the introductions, in the first pages, that he now admits that they were wrong when they opposed the Ottoman state because, during the time when they were under the Ottoman state, any Arab could travel freely throughout the land. In the Arab and Ottoman eras, no one stopped him or asked him about his ship, his visa, what brought him there, why he was staying, or whether he needed residency before settling down. So, Arab unity was a reality during the Ottoman period, a true reality. It's no longer so in the current era. Arab nationalisms are tearing us apart. He even had a nice saying, Arab rulers are nationalists as long as they're not in power. The moment they're this was his time, but now none of those in power even think about nationalism. Arab unity was a reality during the Ottoman era. You'll find that the Ottoman state, even though its soldiers were predominantly Turkish, defended Mecca, Medina, the Red Sea, and the Suez Canal. So, what about Palestine, Brother Murad? When Palestine fell, who considered themselves responsible for defending it? No one. The state when the Ottoman Empire was defeated in World War I, Palestine found itself without anyone taking responsibility for defending it. There was no state or political leadership. It was adrift. It was lost. It's like taking a city like Qanr or Qutahir or Fayoum in Egypt or Nablus and saying America invaded it. How could Palestine, which was part of the Levant province in the Ottoman Empire, face British occupation, the empire on which the sun never set? Yes, there's no doubt that the best day in the Ottoman Empire was better than what came after. So, this is the beginning of the decline, and this is the end, or the end of the decline. Of course, we are still in decline. I just want to ask you, you're saying this is the beginning of the decline, but where is the peak of the decline? I'll tell you, the fall of the caliphate, but we haven't reached rock bottom yet. We haven't even started to leave rock bottom yet. We've hit rock bottom and that's it. In my estimation, we were at rock bottom. The 1960s meant we reached rock bottom. We're not reassured now. Now we as a nation are on the path to our resurgence. What's happening now? Of course, from the Arab Spring, from the Al-Aqsa flood, and from the religious awakening, is proof, although this nation has begun to regain itself. Without a doubt, Professor Muhammad, the main human relationships are three: the relationship between man and the Creator, the relationship between man and society, and the relationship between man and the state. This question you discussed was directly related to the idea of the relationship between man and the state. In truth, this is a topic that requires dozens of episodes to fully explore. And speaking of it, it's unsettling for regimes when people learn about their relationship with a state from a religious perspective. They're shocked, for example, that they have to pay taxes, and they're shocked by many other things. Of course, yes, that was question 19. Yes, I'll move on to question 20. Yes, and this question will conclude our second axis, which is the introduction to Islamic civilization. It will then lead us to the third axis in this blessed series, which is the axis of the Prophet's biography. And it will be, God willing, a very interesting axis. Question 20 in this series is also related to Islamic civilization. Professor Muhammad, I mean Islamic civilization and its great heritage. My brother, you Muslims, again, it seems you have a problem. The idea that it moved to the West and all this civilization, heritage, books, libraries, and most important products that all Western and European civilization is built upon it is based on these few books that you claim we took from you. So, if Islamic civilization really moved to the West, when did these sciences, this civilization, and this heritage move? And how and when did this happen? It's good that you mentioned these few books. Let me give you a quote from a historian that you'll like, God willing. You know, I remembered the poet's saying, if the good things I boast about are sins, then tell me how to apologize, meaning the beautiful thing I'm proud of and boast about turns out to be something bad. So what am I supposed to do? How do I apologize? Look, my friend, firstly, the fact that the modern Western Renaissance was built on the shoulders of Islamic civilization is a historical fact that historians discuss. A renowned English scholar, Montgomery, wrote a book titled The Influence of Islam on Western Civilization, translated by one of the most prominent, Hussein Ahmed Amin. Edward Perrault, a French historian, wrote about Islamic civilization in the third volume of his General History of Civilizations, a work by French historians. Under the supervision of Musset Crusoe, if I pronounce the name correctly, he beautifully stated that the dust of conquest settled, revealing a civilization more magnificent than any other, a more brilliant form of civilization, and a more advanced state of affairs than any other. He revived the dead of the ancient world and breathed life into it. He meant that the ancient civilizations that were on the verge of disappearing and vanishing were revived by Islam, which preserved their knowledge and upon which the West relied in building its modern world. For example, if it weren't for al-Khwarizmi, who developed algebra, you wouldn't know how to create a mobile phone, a computer, or anything else. The discoveries made by Muslims were pivotal in modern human progress. So, the issue of the transition, the issue of the role of Islam, the Islamic civilization's role in the Western Renaissance is a complex issue extensively covered in numerous books. Dr. Jalal Majar has written a book titled Islamic Civilization and Its Impact on Global Progress. Generally, the works of Dr. Ahmed Ford Pasher, Dr. Ali Abdullah Al-Dafar, and Dr. Shorki Abu Khalil have also explored this topic, examining the scientific movement, its transmission, and its influence. Therefore, discussing the merits of Islamic civilization over Western civilization is a time-consuming endeavor. This is a matter of course, and only those ignorant of the subject would question it. Anyone who has researched it will acknowledge its validity, including Westerners. I mentioned some sources in the previous episode, which you can refer to. However, the question we can address now, and which adds to the discussion, is how these sciences and knowledge were transmitted to other civilizations. Here we encounter another virtue of Muslims: they did not conceal knowledge. Even now, at this very moment, if you went to Europe and America, there are subjects that someone like you is forbidden from studying. There are subjects in France that only the French study. There are fields in America that only Americans are allowed to study. In fact, some who went to the archives, the Library of Congress, told me that based on your nationality and origin, you are allowed access to some documents and not others. A Palestinian brother, who was a historian, I think at the University of London, also told me this. Of course, I'm mistaken about the name of the university now, but he told me that the British archives, practically speaking, not theoretically, are divided into 3 sections: 1 section open to everyone, 1 section open to some, and 1 section not open. So, even now, some countries consider certain sciences and some sections to be matters of national security, which they only allow access to for certain individuals or elements they deem secure. This was not the case in the Islamic world. The Islamic world had open mosques, open institutions, and teachers. Any student of knowledge who came from the east, west, north, or south of the world seeking knowledge was promoted. They could even enter, and sometimes, the Islamic State. Whether in Andalusia or elsewhere, scholarships and stipends were given to Frankish students coming to study at the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which was one of the major scientific centers at that time. So, firstly, why didn't Muslims hide or conceal their knowledge from others? So how did it spread? We can say that it was through continuous interaction between the Islamic world and the Western world. There was interaction through wars, trade, and cultural exchange of knowledge and learning. But anyone discussing this topic will see three major gateways for the transfer of science. First gateway was the period of the Crusades in the Levant. What did the Crusades in the Levant do? They brought many people from Europe, which was mired in ignorance and darkness at that time, to the Levant, which was one of the most flourishing places, meaning one of the most scientifically advanced places in the world, and they wanted to settle them there. The Crusades remained in this place for 200 years. A huge number of knights, a huge number of fighters and warriors, a huge number of priests, and a huge number of adventurers. All of them took from this environment civilization to the extent that it was possible. Of course, included those who were intolerant and rejected it, and those who embraced it, absorbed it, and converted to Islam, joining the Muslims. There were also those who were keen to collect books and sources, translate them, learn the Arabic language, and bring them back to their countries. This was because the sciences of medicine, astronomy, pharmacy, and engineering, these were all the masters of these sciences. You mean you were the Crusaders, and they came to conquer. They came to conquer the most advanced centers of learning. So, a large number of people possessed a great deal of knowledge and science. Of course, even the Crusaders in the Levant were influenced by Islamic civilization, at least in their behavior. They started eating at tables, they started eating with spoons, they began to learn about medicine because medicine was, of course, advanced. Among the interesting books and sources that recount some of these things is the book Al-Atibar by Isam ibn Munki, the prince and poet. Isam ibn Munki was one of the knights and poets, and he was a ruler and politician who lived to be over 90. He had relations and friendships with the Franks, and he entered their lands and traveled to their kings. The journey between the kings of the Muslims and their kings, and his book Al-Atibar contains subtle points about how these people were influenced by the Muslims and how they were repelled by the newly arriving Crusaders. He says, "You're coming to destroy." He tells you, "I went to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque once, and one of them attacked me. My friends, who were Franks, stopped me, and then he said, 'Sorry, this man just arrived. He's from France. He doesn't understand, he's clueless.'" Laughter. During the Crusades, this period was one of the passages for the transfer of Islamic civilization to Europe. The second gateway was Andalusia. Andalusia was a flourishing part of the Islamic world in the West, directly in contact with the kingdoms of darkness, which were France and Germany at that time, living in ignorance and darkness. Cordoba, for them, was something of paradise, something amazing, something dazzling, something extraordinary. And then how they were living together, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, but it didn't seem right to them. Europe at that time was dominated by religious fanaticism, with massacres taking place. How could Jews, Muslims, and Christians live together without any problems? For them, it was like this. Remember Obama's speech in Cairo in 2009, it was a nice speech and he was trying to get closer to the Islamic world. He mentioned Andalusia, saying it was one of the foundations upon which the West built its modern progress, one of the centers where science and knowledge were transferred from East to West. He started his speech with a verse from the Quran. I mean, this is an American president speaking, so he wouldn't say anything. I mean, Obama, though. Trump might be a bit off. I mean, Obama is a lawyer, and his speeches are written at a high level. So I'm saying this is a well-established fact that no one can deny. Many Westerners came to Andalusia from France, Italy, Germany, and other parts of the world. Westerners studied at the Great Mosque of Cordoba, and some complete mosques of Fez and traveled around. These are the ones we mentioned. When we talked about Orientalists, they were the vanguard of Orientalism. Yes, we said that it was the first movement. The first Orientalist was a pope in Rome, Giovanni Dolac, who studied in Fez and in Andalusia. So here, too, was a major conduit for the transmission of Islamic sciences, especially after the fall of Rome. What the Westerners inherited in terms of books and manuscripts and what we mean now. For example, the library of the monastery of the Is in Spain is one of the mines overflowing with Arabic and Islamic manuscripts. And of course, after that, every cultural center had a huge library, like the Royal Library in Madrid and others. We can also add to Andalusia a third, smaller conduit, which is Sicily, the island of Sicily, which is now in southern Italy. This island was ruled by Muslims for about 200 years, something unknown, a period of great prosperity and flourishing. It was the only period in the entire history of Sicily, the period during which Sicily gained prominence in the world of civilization was the Islamic period, less than 200 years ago. Before that, Sicily was a secondary power, and after that, it was another secondary power, but Sicily stands out as a source of civilization. There is no other period besides the Islamic one. This period, of course, was written about by Italian historians and Orientalists, including Francesco Gabriel, considered one of the most important Italian Orientalists who wrote about Sicily. Before him, his teacher, Michel Amaury, wrote 3 volumes on the history of Sicily. This information was widely circulated in other books that quoted these 2 authors. So, what Europe took and inherited that prolonged the life of Islamic civilization in Sicily was that those who expelled the Muslims from Sicily and defeated them were the Normans. The Normans were a group not religiously Christian. They practiced a kind of pagan religion and were not devout Christians. They had problems with the church. When they ruled Sicily, Islamic civilization continued there. The king the Normans began wearing the ornate Arab robe and were dressed with the title Al-Ghalib Billah, the victorious by God. Roger was addressed with Islamic titles. Even now, in Palermo, a capital city, there is a palace built in the Islamic style. Its court was Arab, and they housed the famous geographer Al-Idrisi. I heard that even the currency was printed in Arabic. They preserved Arabic in the palaces, and there are verses because he doesn't even know that these are Quranic verses. So, what I mean is that when he inherited an Arab civilization and it continued, this prolonged the life of Arab civilization. Then, the third passage, although there is disagreement among historians about this, is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, even if it wasn't, even if it wasn't, they took books and manuscripts from it, because it was a strong Ottoman state. But the life of the Ottoman state, the systems of the Ottoman state, and what was in the Ottoman state in terms of tolerance and strength also inspired the Europeans with the idea of tolerance and coexistence, and the idea that one state can contain more than one race and more than one religion, and they fled to it. Those persecuted for their faiths in Central Europe fled to it. That's why Jews fled. Spanish persecution. Followers of Martin Luther fled. Followers of Calvin fled. They found refuge only in the Ottoman Empire. For them, the Ottoman Empire was like London or America for us today. If someone is persecuted in their country, London is often the best place to go because they know it has a long-established legal system that won't be compromised, and it's a strong state that won't succumb to the pressures of ruling regimes. The Ottoman Empire was like that at that time. People migrated there because there was tolerance, freedom of movement, and the ability to practice one's religion naturally. There was no fanaticism. Of course, they acquired some knowledge, but the Ottoman Empire, in its rise, had already begun the Western European Renaissance. Ottoman Empire, but there's no doubt it was also one of the crossroads for the transmission of civilization, even if it wasn't through translations of sciences and arts. Of course, Ottoman historians and some Ottoman heritage, as mentioned in the books of Piri Reis, the book on the sea and others, was also consulted and benefited from by Europeans. Piri Reis was a commander of the Ottoman fleet, meaning he navigated the Mediterranean as if it were his own home. He created maps of the Mediterranean and its islands, and these maps were Piri Reis's maps. Europeans later benefited from all of this. The three major crossings were during the Crusades and the Andalusian period, meaning the Levant during the Crusades, Andalusia, and the Ottoman Empire at its peak, and Sicily. I'm now referring to Andalusia. Consider it a minor crossing, or perhaps a fourth crossing. I have no objection. But Baghdad wasn't one of these crossings. Baghdad was a center of learning, but you're talking about the regions where Westerners acquired Islamic sciences. The regions where they were present in large numbers and from which they acquired a great deal weren't Baghdad, Cairo, or Fez. They were places where there was a significant Western presence at some point due to certain circumstances. For example, the Germans were impressed, but this was a gift sent to them, or perhaps he sends them books. Of course, there might be books, there might be correspondence, but you're talking about a mass of people who absorbed a great deal of civilization at one time. This is what we call a gateway, a conduit. This was Andalusia, this was the Levant, this was Sicily and the Ottoman Empire. Meanwhile, the other centers of Islamic civilization was this transfer forced, or was it reciprocal? Of course, from the very beginning, I said that the interaction was continuous. Wars were ongoing, trade was ongoing, embassies were ongoing. So, whenever an ambassador came to Baghdad, Cairo, Fez, or Cordoba, whenever an ambassador came, he would see and convey what he saw, trying to obtain a gift, trying to acquire technology, trying to learn. He might bring books with him, he might bring scholars. All of this happened continuously, without interruption. But this isn't what conduits are. These are ultimately individual and limited relationships. Yes, but to find a large number of people receiving a great deal of knowledge at a time that is, and historically intermediary, this is what they call conduits. Where did they come from? That's what we're talking about. But of course, there was no coercion or anything. They sought knowledge first. Whoever came as an ambassador, like anyone else, wanted to strive for the advancement of their country. When they saw something impressive among Muslims, they wished they had it, just like we do now when you see something impressive among Westerners and you want to use that technology, that system, or that method. So, of course, there was no coercion or anything. It was something they benefited from. They were keen on it. I'm one of those pedants. I'll put down the expression once he was telling me, brother, Queen Isabella put more than 1 million books in the square and burned them. What's left for you? I mean, what's left for you? So I asked him a simple question. Have you ever heard of the Yusufiyyah school, my dear? The idea is that there are people who are completely convinced that, brother, you are finished. These people, when they rose up on their own 2 feet. They stood on their own, they worked on themselves, they built, their research was completed, they achieved a renaissance, they progressed, you regressed. So, don't be upset, that's life. Yes, yes. From this perspective, we pose this question, but the summary of this answer is that the turning points in the process of civilizational transition lie in 3 major crossroads of the Levant. During the Crusades, Andalusia and Sicily, followed by the Ottoman Empire. Yes, with this question, Professor Muhammad, we have concluded the second axis in the series 100 Questions in History. We are now preparing for the 9th episode, God willing, which will focus on the Prophet's biography and related, very pressing questions. Also, for those following this series or joining it for the first time, we want to clarify that we have opened 10 axes, each with its own set of questions, totaling 100 questions in history, which is the title of this series. May these questions be beneficial and more to this great, ancient, and glorious nation. Thank you, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you. Abu al-Harith. Until we meet again in the next episode, may God protect you. Until we meet again, to watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories and defeats, its leaders and scholars, its events and secrets, governance and politics, wars and battles, all you have to do is follow our channel, Our History, on YouTube. Our history from the farthest point in the past to the farthest